Hi, Emmanuel. It's really great to have you on.
You.
To give the audience a little bit of backstory, I actually heard you speak on an AI panel at Brain Bar in Budapest, and you were one of those people who was not so gung ho, all in on AI, completely making every single thing better in the world.
Mhm.
You were a little bit more of an AI skeptic.
Yeah.
Um, I am hearing myself a little bit. Sorry. um, so I'm a little bit. So you were basically a little bit of an AI skeptic. You have some questions about AI, some pauses, some concerns. Maybe there are areas where you think that we perhaps shouldn't pursue AI. Um, can you give me a little bit of background on yourself and what you
Yes, of
do?
course. But first, tell me what you thought of the debate.
Well, I think both sides make good points. I'm probably lean a little bit more towards your side of things,
Hmm.
where I think that, there are some areas that I would be very concerned about AI being implemented, and we're rushing into things without having built safeguards. And I think with a lot of technology, we have a tendency to sort of build something and then think about, okay, now how do we deal with the repercussions? So everyone's so excited about AI. I mean, I'm excited about AI. I'm both an optimist and a realist, I think. So for me, I think that um, I liked hearing kind of something that was more akin to a debate as opposed to just the gospel, right?
Yeah, yeah. I enjoyed it. It was fun. Yeah.
Did you enjoy
Yes.
Hungary as well? Was that your
Yeah.
first time here?
It was no, I've been there before, which was good. I didn't have the pressure of sightseeing, because I've already seen it. So it was good. It was good. And I got to speak with a lot of really, really interesting people from all sorts of backgrounds. So it's really, really exciting. And the debate was against a venture capitalist who is actually really famous in Hungary because he's in Shark Tank, their local Shark Tank. He's a celebrity. So it was
Yeah, I
quite
didn't even
interesting.
know there was a local Shark Tank, and then I was reading his bio. I'm like, "Oh, I guess there's a Shark Tank."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. I guess it's everywhere. But yeah, I think you could see there were a lot of AI related panels there, and there was a lot of it was fully packed. People are just really interested in it because I think it so directly affects their life, right? It's not such an abstract thing. It is actually something that they're going to see the consequences of. Well, they already are, right?
Yeah, and there's a new thing in this, let's say, the latest wave of AI enthusiasm, because there have been a few in history since the 60s, right? But look, if we go back to 2010, for example, when there was a lot of hype around AI, it was the first time in history when it was implemented in commercial applications, right? So you go to Netflix and you see that it recommends shows based on what you've watched, so it learns from your behavior. That's AI, right? And commercial applications happened for the first time in the 2010s, I would say, at least in a widespread way. So that was what dominated that wave of hype. But the latest hype is that everyone is using AI. So that's the novelty now. It's not just business, it's not just recommendations on e-commerce websites or translations. It's everyone just going to ChatGPT, ask questions to the chatbot, and I think that's what has changed a lot this time.
Yeah, and I noticed a similar story in a way with virtual reality technology. You would see, every decade or so, or perhaps even less, you would have all the headlines in newspapers. It's the new thing. It's going to be revolutionary. Now it's here, and then 10 years later, no, now it's here, and so
And it
on and
never
so
is,
forth.
right?
Never really. And never really, even though the technology has really advanced a lot, it never got to the point of the same sort of mass consumer implementation that they were promising. It stayed within the gaming realm
Yeah,
predominantly, and
and that's
another
one of
realm that I
yeah.
won't mention. we were talking about, a little bit about how um, sometimes, there is this kind of idea that we need things and maybe we don't. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the market usually gives this verdict, right? If people sometimes just don't like a product or they don't react to a product very well. My impression with AI is that a lot of, not just AI, the metaverse, blockchain, a lot of people try to push it everywhere without thinking of the client, the customer, which is the most important thing, right? What do people actually want? And I think because I've seen lots of failed AI projects, and I think they always start the same way, by someone putting the cart before the horse. They think AI is everywhere. We need to use AI for something. What do we do with it? Right? There was this entrepreneur a few months ago who's running a business that builds accounting software, and he was looking for investment, right? So he told me, because he wanted to hire me as a consultant, and he was saying, I want you to tell me what I can do with ChatGPT, because I can't tell investors that I'm not using ChatGPT for something, right? And it was accounting software, so it's very, but I told him, this is kind of entrepreneurship upside down. You need to find a problem that exists and then pick the best solution for it, not the other way around, right? So it feels like they have a hammer. A lot of people have this new hammer, which is generative AI, and they're trying to find nails, for the hammer. And I think that usually doesn't end very well.
No, it usually doesn't. And there is this pressure, you have to use AI for everything. That's the latest thing. And if you're not using AI, if you're not investing in AI, you're behind. And so
Yeah.
it's propelling, and maybe it's propelling a lot of very bad ideas too. But
You
what's
know,
your,
and
what's your,
yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about your background? Because you've worked in it a fair bit and have, more of a, from what I understand, a software engineering kind of background. And also you wrote a book. So I'd love to hear about all of that.
Yeah, of course. Look, I'm a software engineer in the first place. That was quite some time ago. And at one point, I did an internship at a research lab in France. And during the internship, they told me if I wanted to do a PhD. They basically told me, do you want to apply to this grant for a PhD? And I was like, okay. I didn't even know if I wanted to do a PhD, but I applied and I got it. And it was
Hmm.
in the topic of AI for satellite image analysis. So we were trying to find objects, even outline objects, by using AI, right? When I say AI, I mean machine learning, which is what most people mean nowadays when they say AI. So computers learning from data, right? And I did that for a few years during the PhD, but I kind of wanted to do something a bit more commercial. I didn't want to stay in the research world, and one of the reasons actually was because of all the exaggeration I saw around the results of all these researchers. I had the feeling that my job and a lot of people's jobs, it was to overblow the power of machine learning, to pretend that it worked better than it did. I felt
Mm.
like I was selling snake oil a little bit. So I thought, this is not what I signed up for. It's not that there's anything wrong with selling stuff, but I thought the role of a researcher was a little bit different from that. So I was a bit disappointed. So I thought I'll just go to if I'm going to do this, I may as well get paid for it. So I'll just go and work as a data scientist, which is if you want, the application of AI to business problems. And I worked for different companies, but my biggest project at that point, when I moved to London, was with Expedia. And I was in charge of building the algorithms that Expedia uses to choose how much to charge for hotel rooms when these rooms are sold to other travel agents around the world. And it's used by millions of people every day,
Did
which
we
is,
all get different hotel rates?
it's actually, yeah, yeah. No, you don't. Um, the we were reselling the rooms to travel agents, so to partners. When you go to,
Okay.
let's say, Ryanair or British Airways or American Airlines, and they offer to attach a hotel room, especially for packages, there's, Expedia can choose to offer maybe special discounts to certain partners. So it's more in that realm. It's not like we're manipulating people, at least not on an individual level.
Fair enough.
But yeah, the thing is that we had a lot of past data, and these algorithms needed to learn from that data, right, to see, okay, how much do we want to charge? And there was also the side of business development. We don't always want to make the most money. Sometimes we want to develop a certain market, so we want to charge maybe less because we want people to buy in a specific location. So there was, a whole lot of work to do. And
Mm-hmm.
it was quite fascinating to, turn on the switch and see that millions of people are actually connecting to that system every day. So it was quite fascinating. And since then, I decided to kind of start working on my own as a consultant. And I landed on lots of failed AI projects that failed dramatically. Sometimes I joined the projects after they had failed, and they were still hiring a lot of people
And of
to
course,
work
we
on
never hear about them.
them. Never. They're all swept under the rug. And obviously, when you're applying for a job like that, they're now telling you, look, this is not working. We just want to keep looking great. So you go into the team and you're so excited to work on this new application. And then you realize that everyone's demotivated and no one's really working that hard because the project already kind of failed, you know? And I started to see this pattern of, again, cart before the horse. Let's just try to use AI and let's hire 60 people for the project. Then building maybe a prototype really quickly without realizing that it's not working that well.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, with machine learning, the computer is trying to find patterns in data. So sometimes it finds patterns that don't really exist. Or maybe you showed to the machine data that it shouldn't see and it found patterns, but then, okay, in real life, later on, when you use the system, it can't really see that data. So I saw a lot of that. And then when people notice that this isn't working, okay, what do? We start to lie about it. We've just hired 20 people, 60 people. We can't really tell the business that this isn't working because what's going to happen to us, right? And at one point, my job was to lie. That's how it was, literally to lie, but it didn't feel good at all. And it was very hard to speak about this with people around me because they told me I was like Meghan Markle. They said, you have a great life, you make a lot of money, why do you complain? Just stop complaining. And yeah, it was true, but it felt, it was soul draining to be working in a project that it's not going to go anywhere. That it's going to be slowly decommissioned, or it's just not going to go well. And I got this impression that behind every successful AI project, there were like another 20 that were like this. And
Right.
it happened all too often and in the same way. And that's why I decided to write a book about all this, to tell people about the hype around AI and how it's not that smart and it doesn't work that well. And a lot of people are exaggerating about it. And I am not negative or pessimistic when it comes to AI. I'm actually quite optimistic when it comes to technology.
So, like me.
Like you, exactly. Because some people think, oh, you're pessimistic. I'm not. I'm actually I'm very optimistic. I don't think it's as good as people say. I don't think the power of AI is as good as people say.
Do you
So
think the
it's not, yeah,
hallucinations are as bad? Is that something that we can even overcome? Because that would be that's a big part of it, right?
yeah.
Of
Well, that's one
what
of the
makes.
main points of my book, actually, which is that I don't think hallucinations are going away. And that's because they're a feature of the system. At the moment, machine learning learns from scanning historical data and trying to put together very plausible outputs that look very well. It's optimized to do that, it's not optimized to tell the truth or to output facts, right? And look, I always give an example of, let's suppose you're driving on a motorway and an umbrella, a flying umbrella, blocks your way, you know from your experience of living in this world that the umbrella is kind of soft, so you can hit it. But if it's a horse, then you're like, oh no, I will try to swerve, avoid the horse.
Right.
But it's not because when you were in driving school, they showed you pictures of a horse and they told you bad, and then an umbrella, good. So your knowledge required to drive goes beyond driving school or the things you learn about driving itself. Current machine learning learns that way. It sees examples of specific, very narrow um, situations that are related to your task at hand. um, they don't build this comprehensive model of the world that we need. And ChatGPT may be getting closer to that, right? Because it's outputting very believable outputs. But I don't think it still builds that model of the world, right? That understanding, if you want.
Yeah, and this is something that also has come up. I remember in the panel that the data sets that it's being fed, ultimately there's going to be more and more of that is going to be generated by AI. So it's not even human generated. And there's a lot of bad content out there that's just generated by AI in order to increase people's SEO, right?
I know. Yeah, it's going to eat its own outputs, and it's probably going to do that very soon. A few days ago, it came out that there was one of the top images in this Google search. I think it was someone was searching for an image of a square in China, and the top image was AI generated, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and then Google kind of banned the image, or they just removed it because a lot of people were speaking about this, but that's unsustainable, right? They're not going to be able to do that with every single output, right? So
One
I
thing
don't.
that I've talked about a little bit in the past, or whined about, is that I have this concern about even search engines. So when we search on something like Google, Google has its flaws for sure, right? How they prioritize the search results, and they seem to be erasing some, but it's at the same time, I'm able to look at it and see, you know, kind of pick and choose my sources of information. But I think most search engines are going to be powered by AI in the near future. And the way that AI does its searches is, some of them do citations. ChatGPT does not do citations, I noticed, but even when I
That's
ask
fake
it, and sometimes
citations.
it makes it up. Yeah, but suddenly you have information that you don't know where you're getting from, and you're not using your mind to sort of discern
Yeah.
what you should follow
So
and
I
not.
think we should take ChatGPT for what it is. It's a model of language, and it's a model. It's actually quite a simple model. It's big, but it's simple in what it does, which is predict the next word based on the previous words, right? So that's all it was trained to do. And the hope, and it actually worked quite well, the hope was that by learning how to predict the next word, it would be able to perform lots of tasks. Because if you ask ChatGPT, complete the next sentence, but in French, then it kind of needs to know how to translate in order to be able to do that. So by necessity, there are lots of very sophisticated tasks that it needs to learn in order to complete the next word. But that's still what it does. And it didn't actually work that well, because at one point they had to create lots of manual examples to try to correct what it did, because it didn't really fulfill all the tasks that well. And that was done, they hired a lot of people, in Kenya, I heard, for like $2 an hour to create manual prompts.
Hmm.
But the bottom line is that we have this system that tries to model how we put words together to try to guess the next one. That's very different from searching the web, right? It doesn't actually search the web. It doesn't do it in real time when you prompt ChatGPT. It has this model that was created with data up to a certain date, a snapshot of the whole internet, to try to predict the next word, right? So
Yeah.
it's very different. And I think there are lots of applications, but we need to keep in mind what this does so that we don't misuse it. There was this lawyer who created this court filing using ChatGPT, and it cited cases that didn't exist.
I know of this case. Yeah.
But it's trying
Well,
to do that, right?
and I think a lot of times people are, either enthusiastic or terrified of AI, because I think they just don't understand how it works, what it does, that it is predicting that ninth word. And that is something that I think is the cause for a lot of things. So people either in their minds believe that it is this godlike machine at a certain point, right? And it can be, well, here's a question to you. I mean, do you think AI can at any point be human or mimic a human well enough to be confused for one?
Well, I think in some ways it's already doing that, right? Yeah, a few years ago I would have told you probably not, but I think in some ways it's doing. I think it can't really fool us completely because it always ends up making some silly mistake or there's a hallucination. But I think it's getting quite close, and there's this whole question of the deep fakes, right? People using AI to pretend they're someone else, and yeah, so I think it's getting very close to that.
Yeah, the
To be an
deepfakes
issue.
are a major concern of mine, and it's actually what I'm currently researching. But the deepfakes to me present, because they are getting so much better, and they're already really quite good. They will only become more. Now I can look at a piece of art and see the fingers don't, they're too long, and then you can see that it's an AI generated image. But they'll solve that problem, I think. So at a certain point, and especially if there's a bad actor, right? Somebody who's really determined to fool the public, they'll invest in this, right? And so I think in particular it worries me when it comes to, well, political campaigns or spreading particular types
Mm.
of disinformation, because you already see that. And with social media, it spreads very quickly. There's not really a mechanism to correct it. So maybe we'll have some detection when it comes to, if you're trying to use a video in a court case, maybe you do an x-ray of that file, and you figure out if it's real, and maybe there'll be tools that are so sophisticated for that use. But for the most part, in terms of just how humans use it as a layperson, I, currently don't have these tools. I know some companies are working on it, but it feels to me like the tools should have existed before they started creating this technology, and it should have been built into that technology.
Well, some people are saying they should somehow watermark the output so you can tell this was generated by AI. And maybe some companies will do, the big ones. Maybe some regulation will ask them to do that. But a lot of this technology is known to the public. We know how it works. So there will be other people who will not want to comply with that will be able to create this AI. So I think we will be potentially there will be some issues because of this. Yeah,
Do you see any,
absolutely.
any kind of antidote to that? Is there anything that we can do, or are we basically
That's a very good
doomed?
question. I think that I don't know, but I think there will be a little bit less enthusiasm about AI in a few months. I have that impression that now everyone's talking about it, but I think people will get a little bit tired, and as consumers, they will start kind of like, ugh, I'm a little bit tired of this. And I've heard this with ChatGPT already. That some people say, I'm tired of all these wordy, verbose outputs. I can tell it's written with ChatGPT.
Well,
You
my
can.
brother the other day, was talking to him and about, travel, and at a certain point he said something like, "I miss you," and he said, "I miss you," and that was something that my brother never would say to me, right? And I also he accidentally sent me the prompt, so this is actually
Okay.
how I guessed it. But
Yeah.
basically, so I had the prompt, and he was basically prompting ChatGPT to write messages to me saying, this is, right back to my sister who's currently traveling. She's telling me all these things about the travel. Can you tell, right back? And of course, it didn't sound like him even remotely. And somebody sent me, was it, it was an episode of a TV show, South Park. They did an episode where all the guys were sending their girlfriends chat GPT messages because they don't usually like to respond with more than a thumbs up. So
Right. Yeah.
and yes, I think you can detect it, but at the same time, it is I do think it's getting better. I don't think it's getting to the point where, at least in my view, that it can replace human creativity. But I don't agree necessarily that we won't be talking about it. And because, I mean, I think they're going to continue releasing all these different consumer products in particular, like, for example, Siri, I'm pretty sure, and Alexa, they're going to go AI pretty soon. ChatGPT is about, or has just updated, so you can do visual prompts. So I think the more it sort of grows, it's going to stay in that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's
Look, I think it's going to replace a lot of the boring work. Hopefully, maybe actually, it will help us not, do those repetitive tasks that, that we don't like much. It will free up our creativity to do other things. So I think that may happen. But there's a good point you make about creativity or novelty, if you want, because I think there are certain things that AI will not do anytime soon. And generating completely novel outputs, completely novel, let's say, content or copywriting or script writing, I don't think it can do that. There's the current AI is trying to, if you want, regurgitate existing content, put it together in better ways, but it doesn't really generate truly novel stuff. And sometimes I speak of excellent work as opposed to good enough work. I think there are lots of tasks where we just need good enough,
mhm.
and it may replace, and a lot of people who do that as a job, their job is to do just good enough work. They should worry. And I can give you one example. All these SEO driven articles that you find
Yeah,
online, like
I've
20,
written some of these.
you've written some of these, and sometimes
Yeah.
you don't care so much about the quality of the content. You just want lots of keywords so that, the search engine sends a lot of traffic and then you can sell them something. A lot of people hire freelancers on Upwork or Fiverr to do that, and they're very cheap. But the quality of the work, it's not great. It's just an article with lots of keywords. I think those people should worry because now they're going to use AI, and one of the reasons is that it's so much faster. Actually, it's not even about the money. It's like, oh, I just typed it into ChatGPT and it produced a great blog article. And you know what? It's not a great blog article. It's a blog article, and it serves its purpose. But there's a whole market of excellent work, what that has that
But
human.
can people tell the difference? Because we've already had this kind of situation where a lot of content, I think the reason we see a lot of clickbait articles, right, is because when journalism sort of went the online route, it was about, that it's going to cost you very little time to produce a story that's sort of a clickbait story. It's actually going to generate more clicks, but the quality stuff takes longer to make. And have we gotten to this point in our society where we don't appreciate the quality enough to value it?
So I think in many cases we appreciate quality more than we give us credit for, and I can give you an example. But to that point, well, I think they serve their purpose, like it or not. The clickbait articles, they want to drive traffic, right? So if they're written by AI or by a person, it doesn't make such a big difference because it actually achieves the purpose. Even if we don't like it or we think it's kind of ugly, that's what those articles are for. So I'm no one to say that's wrong. It's wrong to use AI for that. It's like you're just trying to get clicks, right? And I think that's going to happen a lot. Lots of clickbaity articles written by AI. And you're saying, will people be able to tell the difference? Maybe not, but it doesn't matter in that context. But I think there are other contexts where people are very picky with quality without realizing it. And that's something I've been noticing a lot lately. People say it's going to replace humans in script writing, copywriting. And I think people, they buy content that is really well done without realizing it. And I can give you many examples, but
Please.
well, there's TV shows, right? TV
Mhm.
shows like, we fall in love with a TV show because they found a really good way to hook us into the TV show. AI can do that. I think in the debate, I gave this example of Homeland, the show Homeland, where they
I love that show.
actually Yeah, I love that show. And they ran spy camp. So they met people who worked for the CIA before to brainstorm topics for the show. Um, and also trying to guess what would be in the news that year so that they released a show that was very relevant, right? So the last season was about this Afghanistan, the peace agreement with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And when they released the show, it was right about the time where we saw all that unfortunate situation unfold in Afghanistan. It was, if you want, the perfect timing for the show, and they achieved that thanks to all those, brainstorming sessions with CIA people. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to make that show that likable. I was here in London yesterday, walking around, and I saw a pizza place that said only VIPs, like a big sign. And I was like, what? So then I read, and underneath it said very, what it was like VIP was an acronym for very impressive prices, right? And I thought,
Okay.
this is very creative copywriting because it got my attention, and it also sent the message very clearly. We are very cheap, we sell very cheap pizza. But it's a great way of doing that. And current AI cannot really produce new creative hooks or angles or copywriting like that. It can combine existing things, but it won't come up with this VIP idea on its own. And a lot
No,
of
I've
people are
tried
like,
to, I've tried to cheat a little bit with it because I'm always looking for shortcuts. And
yeah,
listen, sometimes my writer brain is not functioning very well. And I've done copywriting and all that
mhm,
kind of stuff. But it's very to get it to the point where sometimes it will have something that will give me a little bit of a launch pad of an idea, but I've
yeah,
never been able to produce anything that I could actually use. Now, what it is great at is making the mundane tasks that I don't want to do. For
exactly.
example, I had to do citations, and I thought, well, give me a second. What if I just, instead of going through that grunt work, I will put that through and I just said, give me Chicago style citations. And it does
Yeah,
that very well. And
exactly.
that saves me time. And in that way, I actually think it can enable us to be more creative, do whatever humans can do better than a machine, and
Yeah,
then let the machine do the things that the machine can do better, which
yeah,
certainly there's a lot of that too, or
absolutely. Yeah,
quicker.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I've used it to, I was programming, I was coding, and I needed a color palette in JavaScript, just like a list of colors. Like
Mhm.
it was totally irrelevant. I didn't even need it to look good, so I just went to ChatGPT and asked for that in the format that I needed, and it was much faster than putting it together myself or even searching um, in Google for a palette. And that's an example of, yeah, it just removed, but it's a tiny bit of my work, the whole work, that you do when you build the software for someone, and that's my point here. I spend most of my time trying to see what the client wants, trying to understand what the client wants, trying to prioritize with the client to say, okay, let's go for the feature that brings us the most value or most immediate value. What would that be? So all of that AI can't do, but that's actually the big bulk of work. And I see a lot of people confusing those things.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of dumbness to AI, for lack of better word, because something that you take the most basic human being, not high IQ or anything, right? You take them, and they'll be able to discern certain things that AI cannot. So, an example of that was this was recently on the news. It did an article, I think it was top places to visit in Ottawa, and it recommended the food bank. And
Okay.
on top of it, to add insult to injury, it said, "Come hungry."
Okay.
This is not something that like you take the
Exactly.
stupidest, most unaware person, you're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
So that just
When it comes
shows
to,
us it's not that.
yeah, hallucination, I used to call it, before that word started to be
Mhm.
used, I used to call it epic fails, because that's what it was. AI keeps making mistakes that humans would never make. As you say, maybe not even the dumbest human would ever make that mistake, right? And that's when we see that it's not as smart as we may think, right? It can dupe us for a while, you know, and we may believe that it's truly smart until it makes that silly mistake. And I
And
think we
people
need to factor
project a
that
lot
in.
into it.
When,
Yeah, and
sorry?
a lot of people project also. We project our own emotions, and sometimes people think, well, maybe we should be polite to it as opposed to just bossing it around. And there is
Yeah,
this kind of sense of consciousness. And look, I could be proven wrong, and 100 years from now, maybe it will become. But it's right now, I don't think we're even close. But we have that human tendency, and then once we marry AI with the body, right? If in some form factor, especially form factor that brings up empathetic feelings in humans, that I think there is a danger in that also, because ultimately it's still a machine. And I think it is important probably to have that detachment of machine, but at the same time, there's times where it could serve us to give it a body. For example, taking care of the elderly, if in societies where that's not really sustainable by humans, although that's also a danger. You're replacing a human who's actually particularly valuable to have a contact with somebody who might be elderly or ill, and replacing it by some entity that doesn't have any empathy or feelings. So
yeah,
it's
yeah. It's
a
a very good
conundrum
point.
a little bit.
It's very philosophical, right? You're entering that philosophical territory. Does actually the machine have empathy? I think a lot of people have started to believe that maybe it does. So
It depends on whether we think we're machines, right? What makes
no,
us have empathy? Is it a series of calculations that go on that are,
yeah,
and our hormones might play a role, but also, and then the rest is the machinery.
yeah. I think there's a lot of I think there's almost like propaganda around trying to make us believe that we understand how the brain works, that we understand how the mind works. We don't. We don't have the slightest clue. So there are many things we know, and well, a lot of them by correlation. We know that anesthesia, for example, general anesthesia works, but we don't know how. Nobody knows how. Even a model of a neuron, how the neuron performs a calculation, if you want, nobody has been able to create that mathematical model of that equation that works well in practice when you compare it with real data. There's one organism, the only one so far, called C. elegans. It's a worm, a tiny worm, and its brain has been mapped out. It's the only example we have of a full map of the connections of every neuron of the nervous system of this tiny worm. There's about 300 neurons. But then when they try to use that model to predict the behavior of the worm, it didn't work because they can't really know what goes on inside each neuron, right? So, and I think a lot of the AI fanatics, they try to make us believe that we're already building artificial brains, right? And that came in the debate. So the venture capitalist that was debating against me in that debate, he said it a few times. It's like AI understands, and AI is just like a human brain now, or almost as sophisticated as a human brain. But I wonder, how does he know? Because we don't really know how brains work.
So we had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we're back. But I was saying how in the future, there's a part of me thinks maybe we'd be able to upload our brains onto the cloud, and which means we'll live forever. And maybe that's not possible. But we also don't understand how the brain works, as you mentioned. I
Yeah,
think we have very little understanding. And can we
yeah.
do this without understanding? I don't know.
Well, that's a very good question, and I think, and I speak about that in my book, actually, at least a little bit.
Oh,
I'm going to show it to you, though, since we're here. Smart until it's dumb.
it's a great
So
title.
yeah, there's a whole chapter where I speak about those things, especially that we don't know a lot of stuff, but we also need to ask certain questions. And there's a computer scientist called Scott Aronson who likes to speak about this stuff because he says that a lot of people, they dismiss the idea that maybe there's anything special with our brains or even with organic matter. They say, why would it matter that it's organic matter as opposed to silicon microchips in our brains? So that's silly. But what Aronson says is that if you accept that point of view, you also need to be willing to answer all the sci-fi questions that come with it, all the baggage that comes with that. Because if our thoughts are just computations in our brains that can be performed in any kind of, substrate, then we would be able to, even if it happens in hundreds of years, but in principle, we should be able to upload our, the content, if you want, of our brains and perform those calculations in a different uh, type of material. So yes, you could, for example, travel to Mars really quickly. You just upload that content of your brain and then you just send the signal to Mars and someone reconstructs that. But what do we do with a copy that stayed on Earth? Can we just get rid of it? Right? So those are
Hmm.
some of the questions that what Aronson says is they should be willing to at least try to answer those questions, right? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say, yes, our brains are just computers, so we will be able to copy them. Okay, but what happens if we make 5 copies? Will they all be conscious? I mean, according to that view, then yeah, they will be conscious because consciousness is just computation. But then, can we get rid of a copy because we made another one? We're going to be killing, if you want, a conscious being. Um, so there's a lot of baggage that comes with that, and I think it's fascinating. And it's
There's
a
even
little
a
bit,
TV
yeah.
show about that. I mean, there's two. There's one called Upload, which is about uploading your brain, but
Okay,
in that case, it's the afterlife essentially.
okay,
But depending on how wealthy you are, you have a better afterlife than than
okay,
it's a dial-up modem if you're not very wealthy. And then there was a show with Paul Rudd that was specifically about cloning because
okay,
accidentally, because they would kill the original, but in
yeah,
his case that didn't quite work out. So dealing with that, and who is that person, is it the same? That was really great philosophical show actually, but I
yeah,
haven't even thought about it in this context, which is it's
yeah,
fascinating. But a
yeah.
lot of times
And
we're thinking about these moral questions, way too late, where we like I said, we build the technology and then we think, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or maybe we shouldn't have done it that way. And it's hard because people are going to build it regardless. There's always going to be somebody who doesn't care about ethics, right? So to say, well, we're going to not build anything here, for example, in North America or Europe, that's one
yeah,
thing, but I don't think you can quite stop that, but I don't know what you
yeah,
can do.
yeah. That's why I was quite, unsure when there was this open letter that they signed about, I don't know, 6 months ago from, a lot of
Yes.
people saying they should stop development. Because I was like, what's that gonna do? Yeah, I think on the one hand, it was giving the current wave of AI enthusiasm a little bit too much credit. It kind of fed into that exaggeration of the capabilities of AI, which is what I'm trying to fight. It's not that smart. It's not gonna wipe us out of the earth. But at the same time, it's okay. Somebody else will do it. And the techniques, they've been discovered, they've been published. We don't know all the details of how ChatGPT works because there are some trade secrets, but the main methodology wasn't even invented by OpenAI. It was invented by people at Google who published a paper and explained the whole thing. So
Right.
somebody else will pick it up and continue. So yeah,
Well, we had a lot of, by the way, a lot of glitches during this interview, and I'm thinking it must be because the AI supreme beings, the ones that are going to take over the world, they're they're getting a little handsy. But perhaps it's just technical glitches.
hopefully.
But I'd love to ask you before we sort of part. What are you most excited about in terms of seeing come together in the world of AI, and what scares you the most, or what are you most concerned about?
So what I'm very hopeful, and I hope, even if it's not exactly AI, but I've been speaking a lot with people who work in really, if you want, old industries like aviation, stuff that has been done in a certain way for many, many years. And there is so much to be done. They still use paper for a lot of things and they lose the papers. I just found out that lots of airports here in the UK, they were just using, a paper ledger to register what happened with fire trucks in the airport. So whenever a fire truck leaves the building, they would just write it down, and it was a big mess. And then there's a company using technology to make that more efficient, right? And I'm hoping that we will be able to improve a lot of the things that are still done in a really, really old-fashioned way, thanks to AI or just automation technology. But I think there's a lot to be done. A lot to be done, and I'm hoping we'll. I was speaking the other day in Budapest, actually, with this lady who was telling me, I can't believe that we still have these lines at the airport. How's it possible with all the AI advancements? How can a person be looking at watching the screen, and we have all these cues? There must be something that can be done to make it more efficient. And I think, and I'm very hopeful that we will be able to improve our lives a lot thanks to technology. So that's the hope. Yeah.
I hope so too. And
Yeah.
then in terms of fears,
Yeah. Look,
um,
my biggest fear is that people will think that AI works better than it actually does, or it's smarter than it does, and they deploy it in unsafe applications, right? So critical, like, or safety critical applications, like flying a plane, right? Or having a car drive itself in the middle of a busy city, let's say. I think that's one of my biggest fears, because I feel like a lot of people are overestimating it. Hallucinations are not just a bug that's going to go away that needs to be fixed. It's something that's part of AI, because it's not really, really smart. It's a very good imitator, but once in a while it blunders, and it will continue to happen. And that's kind of, I find it a bit scary. I spoke with this guy who works in aviation safety, and he's been concerned lately of how much people want to somehow use this new AI within planes. But there's even pressure. He told me that he felt people from aviation didn't want to be behind in this race, so they wanted to use generative AI somehow. And I'm like, that's probably not going to be safe, right? So you need to be sure that you understand the limitations before flying a plane with AI.
I
So
guess
that's
my
my big fear.
counter to that would be, okay, but people also are valuable. So, for example, with self-driving cars, people, is the outcome from that, even though that machine may make a really terrible mistake, but people get behind the wheel drunk, they just react in
Yeah.
anger. There's all sorts of human fallibilities, and is on the net balance which one is better.
Yeah, that's been the selling point for a long time for self-driving cars. It's humans make mistakes too. But I think there's a couple of problems with that line of thinking. One of them is that people tend to just count the mistakes, but we also need to qualify the mistakes. Because if a car makes sometimes really weird mistakes that humans wouldn't probably make, even if they don't make them as often, it's not quite the same thing. It's like the surgeon. Would you trust an AI surgeon with a certain success rate? Well, but it depends. Does it sometimes botch a surgery that was super easy, that a human doctor wouldn't have, botched?
Mhm.
So I think we need to qualify the errors. We need to be careful how we measure the errors, right? Because there's a lot of manipulation. I think in those numbers, I've spoken a bit about that in my book. A lot of researchers love to say this works as good as humans, or this is humans, the error rate of humans, but they measure it in a little bit of a questionable way. And the other thing is, like, it just hasn't happened so far. So, for example, self-driving cars are really behind. The whole industry is failing, so they haven't managed to attain the rates they wanted, which is something I predicted for a long time. I've been saying we really can't build self-driving cars within the technology we have now, within the methodology that we know. So it hasn't happened. And if all the cars on the road were self-driving cars, it's a different situation, right? The problem is mixing
Yeah.
them, right, with humans.
Mhm.
And so yeah, humans are fallible, but there's also a question of liability. Who's to blame, right, when something goes wrong? So it's not just about counting the errors. That's my point. That's a little bit too
that's a good
simple.
point, I think. And is there something that you wish was invented that hasn't been invented yet?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Something I wish was invented. Uh, I don't know. It's a very open-ended question, but I think there are lots of very inefficient things that could be made better.
Mhm.
Like I said before, you go to the airport and there's queues and people using paper everywhere, and people collating Excel spreadsheets by hand and just manually copy paste. And that happens a lot. You can't imagine how much. Even huge companies are still, they have a person that's very busy working late because they have to, you know, take all these Excel spreadsheets and put them together into another
Sure.
spreadsheet. So I think it would be good to, invent more things that can alleviate um, that stuff. It would be amazing if we could tell when something's produced by AI. Some people have worked on that, and they're working on it, but I don't know if it's going to work very well in the future, or how well it will adapt to new AI or new AI models, as we call them, because maybe it works well for a certain model, but then it just doesn't. So that would be good. It would be good to be able to tell, to invent something that will help us tell when something's made by AI. That would be a good
Absolutely.
invention.
Well, I hope we get a chance to, improve on the things that allow us to be human, and the things that we don't need. Those are the things that can go to the machine. So hopefully we find a good balance. And I think that's the key. Same with the excitement for AI or dread of AI. I think it's all about balance because it can be both. Well, I really enjoyed having you on, and I appreciate your patience. And thank you so much for
Oh,
being part of this.
no, thank you for having me.